Welcome to Breakout Session B3, Appreciating Acidity. We have a great panel lined up for you today. I just wanted to make a few housekeeping announcements first before we get started. So there may be times during the session where you want to maximize somebody's screen. So to do so, just double click on their image and it will make it larger than the others. This is also a culinary demo session. So you may want to look at the recipes for the demos, and you can find those if you scroll down below the screen. So with that, I see most people are probably in here at this point. So welcome again to Breakout Session B3, Appreciating Acidity. And I would like to welcome our moderator, Michael Harlan Turkell, who is a photographer, podcast host, and the author of Acid Trip, Travels in the World of Vinegar. And we'll be having a Meet the Author with him after the session, so stay tuned for that. Welcome, Michael.
Excellent. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. It's been a while since I've talked about vinegar in general, or acidity for that matter. A few years ago, this book came out, Acid Trip, Travels in the World of Vinegar, and I went throughout North America, Europe, and Japan exploring the idea of how to make vinegar, how to cook with it, its cultural context, but I realized during that journey that I'm not an acid elitist, that I like citrus sometimes, that I like other forms of acidity. And most importantly, I eat almost primarily vegetarian at the house, and how much plants need said acidity because they don't have fat. They are primarily made of cellulose. So vinegar or any kind of acidity is really a flavor extractor and enhancer and can only elevate the idea of what vegetables and plant-forward menus can do for you. On that note, I'm joined by two lovely women who, in their own rights, are explorers of the idea of acidity in other cultures. And first off, we're going to talk to Azeez Soco, who is a self-proclaimed food explorer, a geologist, and studier of West African cuisine, as well as her Nigerian roots. And I've been reading her Kitchen Butterfly blog a lot lately and scrolling through her project Feast Afrique, which is a place where she's documented the diaspora of West African cuisine. And I definitely think you should check that out. But in her talk, she'll be talking a lot about alternative or forms of acidity that I never thought of while exploring the world for vinegar. Tamarind, baobab fruit, star apples, hibiscus fruit, macroot lime leaf. There are so many more. And without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Ozoz and watch her presentation once again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. Today, I'll be sharing with you my new Nigerian kitchen approach to a classic Nigerian dish called pepper soup. I've paired it with mushrooms, which are common in Nigerian cuisine, plantains, and green beans. Next slide, please. See, the way acid works in Nigerian cuisine is quite often out of hand. It's a different expression from what you have in Eurocentric and North American cuisines, in that citrus isn't a common ingredient in cooking, vinegar isn't a pantry staple, and we get acidity in other forms, primarily through spices, but also through leafy greens, herbs, flowers like hibiscus sebadifera, which in Nigeria we call zobo. And zobo has sour, tart notes, and then there are also a variety of fruits. A lot of these are consumed out of hand, and I'll show you some pretty pictures in the next few slides. Next, please. So you'll find a variety of citrus across Nigeria. These are all different citruses that come across, so from pomelo to white grapefruit, different types of lemons, bergamot, limes, all sorts of things. But again, acid here is more eating than cooking. Next slide. This is a variety of tamarind, which we call icheku or awing. It's otherwise known as the velvet tamarind, and it's the exact same, well, it's Similar flavor notes as tamarind that people are used to, sweet and sour, but this also has a powdery texture, and quite often people eat it out of hand or turn it into drinks. Next slide. And this is my favorite fruit in the whole world. In Yoruba, a Nigerian language in the Southwest, it's called agbalumo, but in its botanical name is the African star apple. And it is a very sweet, tart, and sour fruit. Again, eaten out of hand, but over the last 5 or 6 years, I started cooking with it and exploring things like infusing it into vinegars and things like that. Next slide. Hibiscus, I already mentioned that. On the left, you have hibiscus flowers in a dried format, often used to make drinks. And on the right, you have the leaves of the same hibiscus plant, which deliver a very sour, acidic note to soups and stews. And so these are some of the ways that acid kind of works its way into Nigerian cuisine. Next slide. The predominant category of delivering acid is spices, and you have a huge variety. This is just a subset. You have irugaje, you have lime leaf, makrut lime leaf. In Nigeria, we typically would use ordinary lime leaf, but I live in Canada, and so that's what I use instead. But you also have herbs. So bitter and spices deliver the same function to dishes that acid does in Eurocentric and North American cuisine. So, it brings that diversity of flavor, cuts through texture, kind of adds layers to flavor and not just one note. So these are some ways that we work acid into Nigerian dishes. And on the next slide, I'll be sharing with you one of my favorite recipes. I mentioned earlier, it's Nigerian pepper soup. I know that when people hear pepper soup, they expect it to be fiery and hot, but the Nigerian lexical culinary language is different from North American. And so, the use of the word pepper in Nigeria really categorizes a whole range of woodsy, floral. It categorizes spice, but is described as pepper. So pepper soup is that Nigerian cure-all, like chicken soup in the rest of the world, that healing broth, nourishing comfort. And my blend is very typical of the coastal south of Nigeria. In the image on the right, you have a whole range of spices that deliver nutmeg type flavor, spicy, woody, bitter, musky, caramel even. You have alligator pepper, you have lemongrass, and all of these go into a broth that is akin to Vietnamese pho. If there was one dish that closely resembled Nigerian pepper soup, it would be Vietnamese pho. The version I present today is not the classic Nigerian version, it is my new Nigerian take, and it combines 4 elements. There's a tomato pepper soup lemongrass broth, sauteed mushrooms 2 ways, sweet plantains, and edamame beans. And on the next slide, I'll talk you through the steps. So I begin with the broth. In here, you have the pepper soup spice blend, dried red chilies, which Nigerians call dry pepper, cherry tomatoes, fresh cubeb, guinea peppers, dried shrimp, and cinnamon basil, and there's some sea salt. On the next slide, I'll share how I have adopted a technique pioneered by Raymond Blanc, which is creating a tomato essence where you macerate and marinate tomatoes. And instead of using like salt and black pepper, I have done this maceration process with the pepper soup spice and all the ingredients that would normally form the flavor base of Nigerian pepper soup broth. And I've just left that to strain and At this stage, it's an uncooked broth. And on the next slide, I share how I make my lemongrass water, which is essentially taking stalks of lemongrass, blending that, straining out the fibrous bits, and reserving the water. And the two steps, the tomato essence and the lemongrass water, form the base of the broth. On the next slide, I'll just show you a little bit about the mushrooms that I've used. I've used a variety of mushrooms. I've used king oysters, regular oysters, flower mushrooms, and enoki. I've fried half of them. The king oysters, which are really meaty, I've seasoned with pepper soup spice and kind of pan fried that in palm oil for a smoky, floral, slightly fermented flavor. And then I've poached those in the broth to cook them. And I've sauteed the oyster mushrooms, flour, and the enoki in peanut oil. On the next slide, I do two things. I cook plantains firm, ripe, sweet, just simply boiled in water with salt in their skins, because I find that tends to preserve a lot of the flavor. And then I've poached my beans, edamame and winged beans, which don't classically go into Nigerian pepper soup. Nigerian pepper soup is typically like a starch, so like boiled plantains or yam or sweet potatoes or cocoyam taro. And then the pepper soup broth with whatever protein you're using. But I've added these vegetables because I like the textural and flavor contrast. So the next slide, I'll show you a short video of the assembly. It's time to assemble my bowl of pepper soup. I'll start with the shredded oyster mushrooms and enoki, followed by the flower mushrooms. And then I'll add the palm oil sauteed king oysters. Sweet plantains go next, just a couple of pieces. Followed by the poached edamame, which I like for the crunch and a slight sweetness. I also like the color contrast. I'll add the winged green beans. Again, textural contrast, freshness. I'll top with a mackerel lime leaf and then finish with the hot broth. It has that slightly acidic tomato essence and the pepper soup spice. And that's it. My new Nigerian bowl of pepper soup with mushrooms and plantain. And really, that's it. And for me, it's just exploring different ways that acid comes into play that it might not be common in other parts of the world. So I hope you enjoyed that.
I have to say, it was an amazing presentation. I've watched it, I think, thrice now, even before we just saw it. Because what's so interesting to me is how you use global techniques to influence this West African diaspora as well. Bringing in Raymond Blanc's tomato essence with an all-acid bouquet garni. What other cultures have you tried to take from and infuse into your native cuisines or the West African diaspora?
To be honest, I quite often find resonance and a lot of similarities between West African cuisine and culinary techniques and Southeast Asian culinary techniques and Indian culinary techniques. But quite often, there's so much depth in exploring West African culinary techniques itself that I'm constantly learning. What I liked about Raymond Blanc's method was, in Nigeria, we eat a lot of tomatoes. Tomatoes, we cook with a lot of tomatoes, and I know that brings acid as well. But in the ways that we do it and the ways that we combine tomatoes, sometimes you don't have that pure tomato flavor. And for this recipe, it worked really well to add that layer and note of fresh, slightly sweet, acidic tomatoes with the Nigerian spices. Like I said, I'm very much a food explorer. So if there's something that I find that reminds me of Nigerian cuisine in some way, I will explore it.
Someone just asked a question about hibiscus, and it's actually timely for me to chime in on this as well, because I just wrote a piece about sorrel leaf for Plate Magazine, and they asked whether or not all hibiscus varieties are edible. But can you first explain the difference between what sorrel, the drink is, maybe, as well as hibiscus flower?
So not all varieties of hibiscus are edible. Some are just ornamental. This particular variety of hibiscus is Hibiscus sabidifera, and it's common across the Caribbean islands, many parts of West Africa, and North America, and even Latin America. So what happens? So the leaves, I think there's kind of a confusion in the names, because in Nigeria we don't call it sorrel. Sorrel doesn't show up in Nigerian descriptions of hibiscus. We call it zobo. But I think that it's a long time since I tasted European, North American sorrel, the green, but it has the hibiscus leaves distinct from the flowers and the calyx, which is where you get the drink from. The hibiscus leaves are quite similar in flavor to sorrel. And I think that's where the approximation comes from.
Yeah.
The people have assumed them to be the same thing, but they're actually different.
Yeah, I believe there are 4 types of sorrel, and only one is red-veined. But going back to this French influence of Raymond Blanc, I think the first time I ever even understood acidity was Trois Gros salmon in sorrel sauce. Never even thinking that a green leaf could apply the amount of acidity needed to cut through that fat.
Exactly, and I think that's the interesting thing for me. And when I was thinking about this presentation, and when I think about Nigerian cuisine, I never really think of acid as being a major component. I tend to think of spicy, bitter, umami as being, sometimes sour as being the ones that are front and center. And so it kind of, I started thinking to yakwa. Yakwa is what we call the hibiscus leaves in northern Nigerian language, Hausa. And when I started thinking of yakwa, I was like, oh yeah, that is sour. That is, that brings tart. And it's interesting that acidity is embodied by different ingredients that don't have to be citrus or vinegar. I think that, for me, that's the thing that I want people to kind of understand, that through the use of a diverse mix of spices, you can deliver the function of acidity.
See, whereas all I knew was Senegalese chicken yassa, which uses the trifecta of citrus, vinegar, and mustard.
And like, I shared with you earlier, that is a colonial French influence on Senegalese cuisine that results in lemon and mustard being part of that culinary canon.
Well, thank you so much again for your presentation. And if you do not follow Ozoz yet, please do so at Kitchen Butterfly. And I can't get enough of Feast Africain. I've been digging into it, and it's a wonderfully exhaustive documentation of West African diaspora. So thank you for doing that, and thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Next up, we have a wonderful woman by the name of Linda Shu, who I'm a little intimidated by because she's a physician, a professionally trained chef, and founder of a plant-based teaching kitchen for patients at Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco, where she's the director of culinary medicine, and also just came out with her first cookbook, Spicebox Kitchen, which explores vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian cuisines from 4 regions around the world. And what's so lovely about this is that each of those sections also have a pantry, and one of the big pantry items is acid, and there are so many different kinds. So thank you, Linda. You'll be talking to us about acidity while also cooking 2 of the recipes from the book. So let's get started.
Great. Thanks for that nice introduction, Michael, and welcome everybody. And I think I have a very big act to follow with Ozoz. That was amazing. And I have so much to learn, actually. So I'm excited to learn more at Kitchen Butterfly. So my take on acidity is actually much simpler today than that grand tour that Ozoz gave us. Today, I want to focus on just one type of vinegar that's used in Chinese and Taiwanese cuisine, and that's this black vinegar, otherwise known as doenjang or Qingqiang vinegar. This is just one example that you can find. And you can get this easily, this type of vinegar, in any Asian market, any Chinese market.
And is that golden plum?
Yes, indeed.
I know my way around vinegars.
I know you do, actually. And as you noted, I love acidity in general. And I do appreciate that in many other parts of the world, it's not just in vinegars and it's not just in citrus. So, but I did want to highlight this. I love the flavor of this vinegar because similar to balsamic vinegar, which it looks like in color, and resembles in, I think, the mild acidity that it has and the maltiness, it just has a very distinctive flavor for which, if you're not familiar with it, you've probably had it in dumpling sauce. That's probably the most likely place that people have tasted it. So today I'm going to show you 2 ways to use it. The first is a recipe that is in Spicebox Kitchen, my new cookbook, and it's for basically an eggplant that you put into a sandwich. So you can enjoy this eggplant dish either on its own as a vegetable side dish. Speaking to the plant forward theme of this conference, you can also add some meat to it if you want to. So a traditional version actually would be as an entree with some ground pork, most commonly. And if you choose to do that, you can season the ground pork with some sugar and soy sauce before browning it. You'll brown it first, and then you'll add it to the rest of the eggplant dish as I'm cooking it today. So I'll just start with that.
Awesome. I will note that when traveling around the world for Acid Trip, I really wanted to go to China, but couldn't get into any vinegar breweries. But I did go to Southwest Japan, which also has a culture of black vinegar called Kurotsu, which is completely different than the Qingqiang that you're using.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that Japanese black vinegar, but again, more to learn today.
Yeah.
So I'll show you first the ingredients that I'll be using. So we have just a little bit of the black vinegar here and some low sodium soy sauce. And for the healthy cooking teacher and doctor that I am, I also like to emphasize that using acidic flavors, whether it's vinegar or citrus or any of the many herbs that Ozoz taught us about, it's a way of introducing a salty flavor without relying so much on salt. Obviously, there's a place for salt, but that's one trick that I like to use for people who are watching their sodium intake. So I've just put together the low sodium soy sauce, the black vinegar, and a little bit of chili sauce, and I've mixed it together in a bowl. That's what's going to be used for this dish. We're using Chinese eggplant here, which is less bitter than Italian or globe eggplant. You can use Japanese eggplant. I love both of those. And before I show you the next step with the eggplant, I'm just going to warm a little bit of neutral oil here. This is just canola oil. You can use any neutral oil. This is going to come together really quickly, like a lot of Chinese-style stir-fry dishes do. And we're just going to brown some of our aromatics. We have some minced ginger and garlic. And while that's cooking, I'll show you what I did with the eggplant. So this is the eggplant, which I've cut into kind of a rod shape. And like with any eggplant, I actually did salt it to reduce any additional bitterness for about 10 minutes. And then I rinsed and drained it. And then what I like to do for this recipe, because it cooks so quickly, is I then squeeze it, kind of like just literally massaging it, just like this, which tenderizes it a little bit, but allows us to actually bring in some of the sauce and introduce more of that flavor into it. It gets better absorbed without having to cook it for too long or to add too much liquid. So I'm just going to add all of my pre-squeezed, pre-salted eggplant to the pan. And we'll cook this for this is live. You get to see the steam and I have to shout over the sizzling sound. This is just a pinch of salt. And that's literally all the salt I use in this dish. Just a pinch of kosher salt while I'm browning the eggplant. You're going to cook the eggplant just for really about a minute until it's slightly browned. If you overcook the eggplant, the beautiful violet color of the skin will disappear. The way that most Chinese and other Asian restaurants keep the purple color, which matches my dress, is to deep fry it. And again, as a healthy cooking teacher, I don't deep fry very often. So cooking at high temperature for a brief amount of time to keep that color and not have to deep fry it. So I'm going to rush this along a little bit because this is fake cooking with our time limit here. But the next step, so you cook this maybe another minute longer until it's firm tender. I'm just going to add the sauce that I mixed together earlier. And again, this sauce is the black vinegar, low sodium soy sauce, and a little bit of chili sauce. And
Linda,
yes.
Can you tell us what it smells like right now? Because as I know it, vinegar is a volatile compound. So when you add heat to it, it permeates the room.
It smells great is what it smells like. But it is a mild vinegar. And so you can definitely smell it. And it smells sweet and malty right now, and a little bit like soy sauce. Those are the predominant scents that you have. So I'm going to turn off the heat now so that there's still a little bit of sauce left. I actually meant to turn off a second earlier. You basically want your eggplant to be glazed here, but I'll leave a little bit of sauce. And then the finishing touches, a little bit of Thai basil, which you're just going to literally wilt. So just throwing that in. I'm going to wilt in the pan with the residual heat. And also a little bit of thinly sliced scallion, whites and greens. And so this is just going to, I'm just going to stir it together, and I'll show you a close-up once I do that. Yeah, so this is what it looks like when it's done. And so this is ready to go as it is as a vegetable side dish, traditionally served with steamed white rice or steamed any kind of rice. Whole grains are better for you. And then if, as I mentioned, if you want to serve it with some ground pork that's been seasoned with sugar and soy sauce, you will add back that the browned ground pork at this point and stir it in together at the end. So it comes together with the flavors of the sauce. You could also use pan-fried tofu, crumbled tofu, if you want to add another protein and eat it as is. For the final step in this though, for the sandwich assembly, which I'm going to show you now, and we'll kind of turn over to this board here. Let me just get this out of the way. I have some pre-cooked cooled eggplants. This is the same dish which has been cooled. The lesson from this is using one dish multiple ways, reducing food waste, and also just as a way of using what you might have served in your dinner menu the night before for your lunch menu the next day. And this is a sandwich that one of my daughters really loved eating. She didn't actually like the hot eggplant dish that much on its own, but she loved this as a lunch that she would bring to school. So what I'm going to put together here, let me just bring everything into view. Is using this cooled leftover eggplant dish to make a sandwich on a split baguette, which is toasted. And then this is a very fusion-y dish. It's called the Chinese American Gold Rush eggplant sandwich, and it's with cream cheese, actually, to add a little bit of a creamy base to it, which kind of tempers the acidity, even though it's a very mild acidity of the black vinegar. So I'm going to spread some cheese, cream cheese here.
What do you mean by tempering? Why is it necessary to have a foil to said vinegar?
It's not necessary, but for people who might not like such acidic flavors, it tempers it. It just softens it a little bit, and it also adds just kind of a nice, obviously a nice creaminess to the dish. So it's another flavor dimension. So we add a little bit of cream cheese, and then we assemble the rest of it, which is some of the eggplant, and with the other herbs in it. So with the wilted basil, with the ginger and garlic. There's a lot of aromatics in here that add many dimensions of flavor besides the acidity of the vinegar. So making sure I get some of all of that into this sandwich. I forgot to put the cream cheese on the other side. So I actually do put it, it's like putting butter on both sides of your sandwich. We're going to use cream cheese on both sides. Okay, and then the rest of it is adding more of our plants here. Some thinly sliced Persian cucumber or English cucumber, skin on, which is a nice color contrast and a nice textural contrast, and just adds some great crunch to the dish, as well as some sweetness. And then I finish with some arugula. And so this, as you can see, this is a really great vegetarian sandwich, which is very satisfying, a great meal, and like all sandwiches, very portable for a lunch for school or work. And then I just use some freshly ground black pepper. And then just put it all together. And we've got our sandwich here. So
wow, what a lucky kid.
Yeah, yeah. So this is my older daughter, who's a freshman in college now, who's a pretty adventurous eater, actually, and has often given me many creative ideas on, you know, what her take is on different things. So that is dish number one, again, featuring the Chinese black vinegar. The second one is going to be really more of an assembly and an introduction to a Taiwanese savory breakfast, which many people are not familiar with. So I'm just going to switch out my ingredients here. Okay. So here we are. This is for savory hot soy milk, which is a common breakfast in Taiwan and other places with Chinese cuisine. And typically, soy milk, first of all, is always served fresh, made out of soybeans. Sometimes it's served sweetened with just sugar, but in this version, obviously, it's going to be savory, which many people are not that familiar with. The savory version gets enhanced with several different toppings, which add textural contrast, which add a lot of acidity, including with black vinegar and some other ingredients, which I'll show you. And also the crunch of, this is a yu chow, which is basically, it's translated, it actually means oil stick. So it's deep fried dough, basically, which comes usually double, and you split in half, and you can either basically just dunk this like you would dunk a donut into your hot soy milk, or usually it's pre-cut and it floats in the soy milk, which I'll show you. So you get a crunch contrast with that as well. So in this case, we have our black vinegar here, which I'm just going to put into our serving bowl. So other components of the traditional Chinese or Taiwanese breakfast that you would have the soy milk with would be things like dumplings, wraps that have dough wrapped with eggs, sao bing, which are basically flaky pastry flatbreads, and sometimes you'll have other buns, either steamed or pan-fried buns. So the black vinegar is in the bowl here, and I've had this soy milk that's been kept very hot in the pot, and I'm just going to pour it in. I want to make sure that you can see it from this angle. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll see that it curdles slightly, which obviously is a testament to the acidity of the vinegar.
I mean, for anyone who's ever made ricotta before, it's
yes, a similar idea, right? So it's variable. I've noticed that with some vinegars, they're a little bit more acidic than others, and with the soy milk, sometimes it doesn't curdle, and other times it does. Today it's kind of in between. So that's the first ingredient, the combination of the soy milk and the vinegar. And then the other acidic ingredient that goes in is pickled radish, which I'll show you here. And I'm also going to show you the typical looking package that you'll find it in the Chinese supermarket. So there are these small packets. You would probably pass by this and think this can't be very good, but it's pretty terrific. It's usually pickled with some chili some garlic, and sometimes a little bit of sesame oil and sugar. And so you'll want to mince that. This is a very common addition or garnish for this.
Someone just asked if we could use takuin, the pickled yellow daikon that you see in East Asia.
You could. It's a bit sweeter. Actually, it's a lot sweeter, but it's fine. There's no right or wrong with this. So if that's easier to find, you could certainly use that. And again, no right or wrong. This is typical. So I'm just going to add that to it. And then we have here the yuqiao, or the fried dough that is cut into bite-sized pieces. So that gets put on top. And then for a few more garnishes, more sliced green onion. Ground white pepper, which is the pepper that's typically used in Chinese cuisine, not as much as black pepper. Black pepper. White pepper is a classic one. And then finally, a little drizzle of toasted sesame oil. And that's what it looks like. So this is a really hearty Taiwanese breakfast. It's like having soup, essentially. It's really warming, it's really rich and delicious, and you can customize it to taste. Some people like to also add chili crisp or chili crunch to it, which is really good as well. So those are my two recipes that I wanted to show you using Chinese or Taiwanese black vinegar, again, which is mildly acidic and very malty in taste. There are other dishes in Chinese and Taiwanese cuisine that feature black vinegar. Aside from the dumpling sauce, there's a classic Sichuan dish of shredded potatoes that can be either cold or hot.
Yes, I love that.
Along with chilies and Sichuan peppercorns. I love that dish.
And the potatoes are raw in that dish too.
They're
right?
raw or blanched,
Gotcha.
or they're pretty much raw. They're crunchy, which is really a different way of enjoying a potato, which I think is great. And there's also, you'll use black vinegar in things like kung pao. There's a recipe for kung pao tofu in Spicebox Kitchen that I use it in. Some other stir-fry dishes. So just a new Chinese vinegar not new, but possibly new vinegar to add to your repertoire, not only in Asian food, but in other cuisines as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for that wonderful presentation. And as Katie just noted, you could join both Linda and myself in the Meet the Author booth after this session.
Thank you all so much. I'm not here to wrap up the session just yet, but I wanted to give a couple logistical tidbits leading you into the networking session that we have after this. So I know we're in day 2, so you're probably all pros, but just a reminder that at the end of the session, you can go to the tabs on the left-hand side of the screen and you'll be able to find Meet the Authors with Linda and Michael, as Michael noted, and as you'll see in the chat there. Asha Gomez is another author who will be doing a book talk as well. There will be networking. You can click on that tab for 4-minute chats. Innovation Hub down below that has lots of presentations and insights from our sponsor friends. And you'll have 20 minutes for that. And then tomorrow we'll see you back at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on the main stage. And now back to our presenters for their final words.
Excellent. Well, I'm assuming the final words will have something to do with acidity, but I'll let you two go first. And again, if you do not follow either Ozoz or Linda through social media or their literature, please do so, because I'm so inspired by the work that you both do. So let's start with Linda. Okay,
great. Yeah, so my final word is just, if you're not already using Chinese black vinegar, try it out. And as I said, try it in different kinds of cuisines. One of my themes is that we can learn so much from using and learning about flavors from around the world and inject it either in traditional ways or in kind of fusiony ways, as I did with my eggplant sandwich, into our own cooking. And so find more recipes in Spicebox Kitchen. I hope some of you will come to my author talk. And you can follow me on social media at Spicebox Travels. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Linda. Ozoz?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. The one thing I'd like people to take away is the multiplicity of ways we can get acid or the function of acid through other things like spice blends. And if you ever get the chance, there are lots of Nigerian online stores where you can find pepper soup spice. There's more information on my Kitchen Butterfly blog. There are many resources, but I'd encourage as many people as want to try to explore Nigerian pepper soup. And don't get worried about the fact that it says pepper, because one, you're in total control and you can moderate the amount of heat that goes into the dish. You have agency over that. But two, it's just it's a dish that has so much captured in it, and it's a different exploration of acid. And I hope that you'll enjoy that, and use it as a pathway to learning more about cultures and cuisines. You'll find me on Kitchen Butterfly and my latest work documenting West African culinary heritage on feastafrique.com. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Well, I don't feel like I have much more to say because they've captured the essence of acidity so well, but I'll go the dorky route and talk about pH is a term that actually means the amount of hydrogen ions in aqueous solution, usually water. And often we talk about acidity as a feeling more than a flavor, but I think what Linda and Azeez did, talking about the flavor aspects of different acidities, is so important rather than thinking about the sensation on a palate. So think about acid as a flavor, not just a function. And I hope you follow both of them and join me for the author session afterwards so we can keep this conversation going. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. And I'll see Michael in his Meet the Author session. Feel free to also join Linda. Thank you, Ozoz, so much for joining us.